Throwing away.
Throwing away.
Yashtim.
Yashtim.
The stick in her hand.
The stick in her hand.
Sutam.
Sutam.
Her son.
Her son.
Mitam.
Mitam.
Considering her son's great fear.
Considering her son's great fear.
Vidyaya. Understanding.
Understanding.
Arvakavatsala. The most affectionate mother of Krishna.
The most affectionate mother of Krishna.
Yesha. Desire. Kila. Indeed. Tam. Krishna. Badhum. To bind. Damna. With a rope. Atat virya kovita. Without knowledge of the supremely powerful personality of Godhead.
Without knowledge of the supreme powerful personality of Godhead.
Because of intense love for Krishna.
Because of intense love for Krishna.
So translation. Mother Yashoda was always overwhelmed by intense love for Krishna, not knowing who Krishna was or how powerful he was. Because of maternal affection for Krishna, she never even cared to know who he was. Therefore, when she saw that her son had become excessively afraid, she threw the stick away and desired to bind him so that he would not commit any further naughty activities. Do you repeat? Mother Yashoda was always overwhelmed.
Mother Yashoda was always overwhelmed
by intense love for Krishna.
By intense love for Krishna.
Not knowing who Krishna was.
Not knowing who Krishna was.
Or how powerful he was.
Or how powerful he was.
Because of maternal affection for Krishna.
Because of maternal affection for Krishna.
She never even cared to know who he was.
She never even cared to know who he was.
Therefore, when she saw that her son had become excessively afraid, she threw the stick away and desired to bind him, so that he would not commit any further naughty activities. So purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Mother Yashoda wanted to bind Krishna not in order to chastise him, but because she thought that the child was so restless that he might leave the house in fear. That would be another disturbance. Therefore, because of full affection, to stop Krishna from leaving the house, she wanted to bind him with rope. Mother Yashoda wanted to impress upon Krishna that since he was afraid merely to see her stick, he should not perform such disturbing activities as breaking the container of yogurt and butter and distributing its contents to the monkeys. Mother Yashoda did not care to understand who Krishna was and how his power spreads everywhere. This is an example of pure love for Krishna. So again, Dhamma Pad Virya Kovada. So Om Gana Timidandasha Gananjana Shlagya Chakshura Meditam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurve Namaha. So this is a very interesting verse. This is an example of some of the emotions of Mother Yashoda, which are called Baba or Babas, to give it an English plural. And of course, the indirect rasas are being expressed here, such as fear and anger. And Mother Yashoda's desire to know is being covered. So this is interesting in the sense that our desire to know is also being covered. Of course, not exactly in the same way. In the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, we find this ecstatic banyan tree described with its roots upwards and its branches down. And also it has some roots going down too. Like a banyan tree, you really can't figure out where the roots are and which ones are the branches. I mean, it's an incredible tree. And it's just, not only it appears to be a very bewildering tree, what to speak of the reflection, which is even more bewildering. But you can't even tell where the roots go in a banyan tree. In our temple in Hawaii, the roots we have the biggest banyan tree on the island. And the roots actually go to the neighbor's property. And they're destroying, at least when I was there, they were destroying the neighbor's foundation. They went so far. So this is the entanglement to this material world. So, anyway. So, Avartam Ganame Tena Ganino Nuchivarna Kamarupena Kontya Dushprena Adalena Cha. So this describes our situation. That our desire to know and our ability to know are covered by our bhavas or emotions, or lust, anger, greed. Avartam Ganame Tena Ganino Nuchivarna. And of course for us, Nitya Vairina, it is burning us in this material world. Kama, what's burning us? Kama Rupena, the form of lust. Of course, Konteya refers to Arjuna. Dushprena Lenacha, it keeps burning you. Oh my God. So, this lust, of course, as we described in the example of the banyan tree, is a reflection of the love that's there in the spiritual world. So both the lust and the love cover the knowledge of the living entity. And the more intense the lust is, the more knowledge becomes covered. And the more intense the love is, the more the knowledge becomes covered, which is interesting. For example, we'll talk about love first. Not the love of this material world, which is based upon some physical constraints. But let's talk about the Vaikuntha planets. In the Vaikuntha planets, they actually have knowledge that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's interesting. They actually have the knowledge that Krishna is God, and they're worshiping him in the mood of awe and reverence. Of course, it's not that we should neglect that knowledge. So, and because of that, their knowledge is not really that much covered. I mean, they really love Krishna, that's true. They're pure devotees, they love Krishna, they want to please Krishna, want to please Narayan. However, they're always absorbed in the knowledge too, the knowledge aspect of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then, if you go to Vrindavan, where the Lord has these characteristics which are not present anywhere else, such as like intimate devotees and loving pastimes and plays the flute, unexcelled beauty, then actually the love is so extreme that it covers their knowledge completely. So in Vrindavan, people are not thinking that Krishna is God. And they're not even interested, like Prabhupada mentions here, which is really interesting too. She never even cared to know who he was. So there's one thing to know who someone is, to know who Krishna is. But it's another thing I don't even care about it. Like most parents, I mean even in this world, most parents want to know who their son is. Or what occupation he's going to have. Like, I mean, my mother, she wanted me to be a doctor. So her love was not complete. Because she cared about who I would be to please her. But in the spiritual world, the love is so complete that they just don't care. So, how do we achieve that particular state? This is the question. Should we just give up our performance of Vaidhi Bhakti at this particular point and just forget about Krishna being God, forget about Dashamula, forget about Sambandha Gyan? Sambandha Gyan means to know literally who Krishna is, what the material world is, what the time factor is, what karma is, what the living entity is, and to know their relationship. Sambandha actually means relationship between all these different factors. So that's very attractive. If we can give up this sambandha gyan and just like be absorbed and roll on the ground in ecstasy. However, if we do give up this sambandha gyan and we do try to jump too high, then because we have all these anarthas, we will actually be absorbed in material, let's say, in a material relationship with Krishna. We all have a relationship with Krishna, even in the material world. Just like the pure devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Uttama Adhikari, he sees everyone having a relationship with Krishna and everyone serving Krishna, isn't it? Madhyama Adhikari makes some distinction. And Kanishta Adhikari, well, I guess he doesn't make any distinction at all, he just sees Krishna in the temple. But a Uttama Adhikari sees everyone as serving Krishna. So in one sense, yes, we are all absorbed in Krishna, but in another sense, there are different varieties of Krishna's manifestations. There's, of course, the material energy, there's the spiritual energy. So it's very important for us at this particular stage to care about who Krishna is. It's very important for us to read the Bhagavad Gita. It was like I was traveling back from Europe yesterday and I was reading Bhagavad Gita. Actually, I read several chapters of Bhagavad Gita. And I was reading the 11th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, which deals with the universal form. So someone may say, why do we have to read that? You've been in the movement for 50 years already. So why are you reading about the universal form? It's where he devours everything or kills everybody. And isn't that boring? Actually, I didn't find it boring. And then we went on from the 11th chapter, the 12th chapter, we read about devotional service and how one should always think of Krishna, one's not. Actually, the beginning of the chapter begins, which is better, to meditate on the unmanifested personal form of the Lord or to meditate upon the personal form of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Krishna says, basically, it's better to meditate on the personal form. For those who are embodied, kleshati katarastesham, vyakta shakta take chetasam. For those who are embodied, meditation on the unmanifested and personal form is very difficult. So, just hearing about these, the 12th chapter, 13th chapter, nature of the enjoyer and consciousness. Anyway, so going through all these different chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, it really helped me with my devotion. It's not that these chapters were about the Mother Yashoda or the gopis or coward boys or anything like that. I mean, you did have Arjuna there who has a friendship relationship with Krishna. But it helped me. And even, another thing I was reading about even helped me too. I was reading some science books on the way, completely in Maya. And I was reading about evolution. And anyway, everybody knows I'm into this nonsense. Reading about evolution, but the more I read, it just helped me love Krishna more. Why? Because it showed how intelligent Krishna is to design something so intricate, so complicated, so unbelievably complicated that people will never be able to understand it. I'll give you an example. I'm talking about heredity, DNA. And actually, another point. I'm preparing something for a Sunday feast one day on this because it's really interesting. That the DNA, which is actually the computer code for basically the way we look, the way we think, except for Krishna conscious people, what propensities we have, etc., like that, is not just an instruction manual for the body and for the brain, but it's actually an encoded instruction manual, not a linear instruction manual, which is encoded in such a way, just like give you an example, this is really interesting. I mean, I just see Krishna in these things, of course. I'm not just completely in Maya. So it's encoded in such a way that if you have one sentence of DNA code, it means something. It's giving you some particular instruction, not giving me, giving the cells some particular instruction when you read it forward. It's giving another instruction when you read it backwards. It's giving you another instruction, which are all compatible instructions when you read each individual element. In other words, in one sentence, there's like at least 20 to 30 different instructions encoded. Everybody understands what I'm talking about? Sentence means that I think, therefore I am, like an English sentence. Sentence means you got, 4 different codons in DNA. Wow. Bhagavatam class, I'm talking about sentence. 4 different codons, A, C, T, G. Anyway, it's not important. Just like in the computer code, you have zeros and ones, right? So there's 4 different things, and how they're arranged in sequence gives, in one sentence, the sentence may be 1,000 characters long. Not that long a sentence. That's a run-on sentence. So the sentence may be 1,000 characters long. So in the one sentence, there may be thousands of instructions. It's not just linear, just like if I read here one sentence, Mother Yashoda wanted to buy Krishna in order not to chastise him. Okay, fine. It's really easy to understand. I mean, I could talk about it a little bit more. She didn't want to really chastise him. She wanted to protect him. I mean, I can get into it a little bit. But when you're dealing with Krishna's DNA code, it's just like unbelievable instruction. So anyway, so the points that this book made, that I was reading, the science book, was that therefore mutations can't really cause any sort of evolution, which is interesting. Anyway, I'm going to give a whole Sunday Feast presentation about this in the future. It's really interesting. And not only that, when I read that, I understood that when you have mutations, then you have a degradation of what they call the genome. Because if you have something encoded so precisely, and you take away one little element in that encoding, you're actually destroying many different messages simultaneously. And so, therefore, interesting realization, that's why people are getting more degraded and living shorter lives and being less healthy as Kali Yuga progresses. It's interesting. That was my realization from the whole thing. So anyway, the reason I'm mentioning this is that when I read this, it reinforces my faith in Krishna. When I hear about how Krishna maintains this material energy, or read about in the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, it just makes me happy because I realize that God is great. Of course, I also appreciate Krishna's intimate pastimes here. So one actually loves Krishna. And I'm not saying, I'm like Mother Yashoda or Nanda Maharaj or the gopis or anything. If one actually loves Krishna, one will love everything that Krishna does, even his universal form, because one will see how it is the same person doing all these things. And oftentimes in this regard, I quote from Jayadev Goswami, who has his Dasha Avatar slokas, which is, Keshvadrita, Narahari Rupa, Keshvadrita, Shukra Rupa, Keshvadrita, Rama Shurira. So it's just so wonderful that Krishna does all these things. And when we go back to Vrindavan and the spiritual world, then we'll be so absorbed in Krishna we won't have to ask those questions. But right now, we should want to see these things. or understand these particular points, we should read the Bhagavad Gita and not just be absorbed in Krishna's pastimes in Vrindavan. At the same time, we can appreciate how all Krishna's exchanging these rasas here, and Yashoda Mai is not really angry like a mother normally is at her child. Normally a mother gets angry at her child. I think I need to unpack this too. That because she's frustrated with him. It's like my mother, she used to get angry with me because she was frustrated with me. I just drove her crazy. But Yashoda Mai is not being driven crazy by Krishna. Every single action that she makes, her anger is impelled by a desire to protect Krishna. This is an important point to understand so that we don't project our own concepts. I mean, for example, we have so many different emotions that we manifest even while we're performing devotional service, but the motivation is not completely to please Krishna. For example, we may be driving somewhere to buy some bhoga for Krishna, and someone may cut us off in the car, and we get angry. And that anger is not out of desire to please Krishna, at least for me, but that anger is out of just simple frustration, because we are thinking, as Krishna describes in the Bhagavad Gita, in the chapter Divine and Demoniac Natures, chapter 16. I also read that chapter. Ishwaraham aham bhogi, siddhoham balavam sukhi. I'm perfect, powerful, and happy, and anybody who gets in my way, I get angry with them. So, anyway, so our emotions are not like that. So it's really hard to understand Yashoda Mai's emotions. Her emotion is simply wanting to protect Krishna. That's it. Not that she's frustrated that Krishna is doing all these nonsense things like breaking the containers of yogurt and butter. An ordinary mother would be like that, isn't it? My son, he just keeps breaking all these containers of yogurt and butter. Is a horrible person. But she's not frustrated like that. She's doing it because she wants to protect Krishna, and she doesn't want Krishna to run away or leave the house out of fear. Anyway, so these are some of the points. So any questions or comments? Questions, comments, arguments, problems, issues? Yes.
I just want to give you one question. At the beginning, we were talking about like the Vaikuntha planets.
Yeah.
So then I was sort of thinking about like we read about Krishna's pastimes and what goes on there, and as far as the Vaikuntha planets, like we hear about Gopal Kumar going there or Giant Vijay,
Yeah.
offending, so-called offending and leaving. And we hear about that the residents are married and they're beautiful, they look like Lord and Ryan, but we don't really know anything what really goes on there. If we know there's awe and reverence, but we don't know that. We know that with Krishna there's all kind of trickery and activity.
Yeah, there's no trickery there.
And there's not, if the only mood is of servant, there's not the other rasas very much, then what goes on there in Vaikuntha?
Well, they're glorifying, a lot of it is glorifying, making prayers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, cooking for him, serving him in different ways. I mean, the servitude is there. It's not just Ishantaras. The servitude, there's some parental feelings there, although they're always mixed with awe and reverence, and there's even some friendship or even some conjugal relationship there. But it's always based on reverence, knowing who Krishna is. It's like it's like, let's say the relationship with the spiritual master is generally based, on knowing the spiritual master's position. It's not that you go up to the spiritual master, take a stick. I do have some disciples like that. But anyway, so it's like just in Germany, and I was getting ready to iron my own clothes. And she said, "Don't you go near those clothes, or I'll chastise you." That's an unusual relationship with a guru. But it's, it is very pleasurable. When we have relationships out of awe and reverence, it's not that they're just dull or dry or anything like that. It's very pleasurable. I remember my relationship with Srila Prabhupada. It certainly wasn't intimate. I wasn't going up to Prabhupada and slapping him on the back and say, "Hey, Swamiji, how's it doing? How's it going today?" But it was very pleasurable. I always remembered who Prabhupada was. And it's also pleasurable. You glorify someone, you serve them, you cook for them. And sometimes even in this world, the wife will have a awe and reverent relationship with the husband, or vice versa. Won't mention any examples here. So that's what they're doing. But they're always aware of who the person is, or that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of God, or Lord Narayan is the Supreme Personality of God, and worshiping him in opulence. And they're never really afraid. Some of these indirect rasas really don't get expressed there. It's not that they're afraid something's going to happen to Lord Narayan. Although there may be that in the Lord's pastimes in the material world, like you have Lord Ram's pastimes, where Lord Ram and Lakshman, they get hit with the snake, the pasha, the snake ropes that Indrajit shot. And, they're both actually lying there practically unconscious. And so the devotees are getting worried about them. But this is a specific pastime. And then Hanuman, he has to go and get Garuda to get rid of these snake weapons of Indrajit. So you do have some of that, but they're always thinking, they're not forgetting that Ram is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And they're thinking, how's this happening? He's God, it's like bewilderment. And Yashoda is not thinking like that. She's not thinking, why the heck is God stealing butter? Doesn't he have enough Lakshmis in the spiritual world to get enough butter? What's wrong with him? He has some psychological issues here, But she's not thinking that. She's just thinking Krishna's an ordinary kid. But it's always, the relationship is always mixed with some knowledge of the Supreme Personality of God. And so the more intense, the point I was making in the beginning of class, the more intense the love gets, the more knowledge becomes covered. The more intense lust gets, the more knowledge becomes covered. Try to remember that. So therefore, it's very important for us to control this lust, kama rupena kontya dushparena lenacha, because it covers up. Or lust, anger, greed. The more greedy we get, the more knowledge gets covered. The more our knowledge gets covered. The more angry we get. Someone gets angry, then they lose everything. Anyway, in the spiritual world and Vaikuntha, they're having a good time. Believe me, I don't feel sorry for you. Those poor guys, they just don't know where it's really at, They should just go up to the Lord Narayan and kiss him, So, So we experience many odd and reverent relationships here that are very pleasurable and very sweet. But even in Goloka Vrindavan, the more love that's there, of course, the love of the gopis far surpasses anyone else's love, even of the other residents of Vrindavan. See, that's the difference between the gopis and, let's say, the cowherd boys or those who are servants of Krishna in the spiritual world. The difference isn't so much or not the essential aspect, is not so much that in the how they look in terms of gopis or what they do, but their mood. Because the gopis had the highest mood and the highest forgetfulness of Krishna's position. In fact, when they get angry at Krishna, that's the highest expression of love, the man. Like when Radharani gets angry with Krishna, then Krishna sometimes becomes so afraid that he has to bow down at her feet and beg for forgiveness with tears in his eyes. So that's the highest expression. So anyway, so that's the gopis. Yeah.
I just have like a clear, it's a small question, but technical roughly, because I think I know, but I'm curious about the difference between Vaikuntha and the spiritual world. Like I understand that Vaikuntha is a spiritual world. But
Yeah.
There's a difference between here and Goloka Vrindavan. Is there different moods? And I'm wondering if they're actually two separate places, or just one's a big word for all of it, and then there's
Well, yeah, in one,
designations.
it depends on the context.
Okay.
The word Vaikuntha is actually a negative definition.
What's
A negative definition means it defines what it's not. Vaikuntha means without anxiety. So, there's other words for the spiritual world. Paravyoma is another word for the spiritual world. Vaikuntha. Anyway, so the Vaikuntha planets can refer in a particular context to Goloka Vrindavan too. Or the spiritual world certainly refers to Goloka Vrindavan, as well as the planets in which Lord Narayan predominates. So it depends on the context. Yeah, so Vaikuntha, but in the particular context that I was discussing right now, Vaikuntha planets would be the location where Lord Narayan predominates. Lord Narayan and Lakshmi, and everyone looks like Narayan and Lakshmi. And also everyone there has the ability to shape-shift. That's an interesting expression. Where they can change their forms to entertain the Lord. Depending, the Brihad Bhagavatamrita describes, depending on what they did in the material world before they came here. For example, some of the residents in the spiritual world, in Vaikuntha planets, can manifest themselves as monkeys or as birds. Although their, let's say, constitutional form is as looking like Narayan or Vishnu or Lakshmi. That's their constitutional form. However, to entertain the Lord, they take different forms.
Is that true of Goloka
Goloka Vrindavan, generally, I don't hear that in Goloka Vrindavan. In Goloka Vrindavan, they keep the same forms. I've never heard of anyone like changing the form to a monkey. If someone's a monkey, they're a monkey. In Goloka Vrindavan, if someone's a cow, they're a cow. But in these Vaikuntha planets, referring to the planets where Narayan and Lakshmi predominate, then they change their forms to entertain and to please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's interesting. All right, any other questions or comments? Yes.
I was wondering, what's the difference between Lord Ram and Lord Krishna in terms of their qualities? Is there a difference?
In terms of the manifestation of the qualities, yes. In terms of the qualities of the Lord, Advaita Chuta Nadira Nanta Rupamadhyam Purana Purusham Aviyovanam Cha, they all had the same qualities. They're all Krishna. It's all Krishna doing different things in different circumstances, like Prabhupada describes. A man in the office has a different relationship than he does at home. But he has essentially the same qualities. He just doesn't manifest them all. So, Vishnu and Brahma are the same. I mean, for example, in the pastimes as Lord Ram, he only manifests having one wife. But as Vishnu, oh my God, there's so many Lakshmis. And as Krishna, he has 16,108 wives. And in Goloka Vrindavan, he has unlimited gopis. So, but it's the same person. Whether
I was referring to mental devotion, there's a description of different qualities of Krishna, 64 qualities.
64 qualities, only Krishna has 64.
And Ryan has 60, so Lord Ram also has only
Yes, that's right. Lord Ram, as far as I've seen, never plays a flute. As far as I see, Krishna has beauty that excels Lord Ram's. He has more intimate devotees than Lord Ram's. So, I mean, these four qualities are only, but Ram, let me get back to the philosophical aspect. Ram, Vishnu, they have all those qualities, they don't manifest them. There's a difference. You understand? Different circumstances. It's not that Ram doesn't have those qualities, but in those particular pastimes, in that particular aspect, he doesn't manifest them. Lord Chaitanya is 64. Yeah. Yeah, because Lord Chaitanya sometimes shows himself as Krishna, the Sadhuj form. But you don't have Vishnu showing himself as the Sadhuj form. But Lord Chaitanya, sometimes he sits on the altar, puts on a peacock feather, and he says,
like drama pastimes.
yeah, drama pastimes. So Lord Chaitanya definitely has 64 qualities. Jai Shri Shri Radhika Lokananda ki